I never meant to stare at her. But every time my neighbor's mom smiled, it felt like she saw right through me, and still, I couldn't look away. I first noticed her the way you notice a sunset, not suddenly, but slowly, as if it had always been there, waiting for your eyes to linger long enough to appreciate it. She wasn't just my neighbor's mom. She was a presence. A soft, steady rhythm in the background of my everyday life. Most mornings, I'd catch sight of her in the garden, tending to flowers that seemed to bloom just for her. She'd wear light cotton dresses in colors that matched the season, pastel shades in spring, deeper tones in late summer. And there was something about the way she moved, unhurried, graceful, as though she belonged entirely to the moment. I told myself I only looked because she carried herself differently than others. Confident, but not loud. Gentle, but not fragile. Yet if I was honest, there was more to it. The curve of her smile when she paused to brush a strand of hair from her cheek. The way her eyes seemed to rest softly on the world around her, never rushed, never distracted. Sometimes, she would walk to her car with a bag tucked under her arm, keys jingling faintly in her hand. The faint scent of her perfume would drift by, floral, with a touch of warmth, something that seemed to linger longer than she did. And each time, I found myself watching longer than I should. It wasn't about attraction in the way people usually mean it. Not at first. It was fascination. A quiet pull I couldn't explain. Because she carried years of life in her eyes, yet none of it dimmed her light. If anything, it made her more radiant. Of course, I worried she noticed. Once, when I glanced up from across the yard, our eyes met. Instead of looking away quickly, like I should have, I froze. And then, she smiled. Not a wide smile, not even one that lasted more than a heartbeat, but it was enough to make my chest tighten. That smile stayed with me longer than it had any right to. It wasn't just kindness. It felt knowing. As if she could see every thought I was trying to hide, and instead of turning away, she acknowledged it with that gentle curve of her lips. From then on, I caught myself looking for her without meaning to. The sound of the screen door opening across the yard made my head turn almost automatically. The sight of her bending slightly to clip a rose, her fingers steady and sure, etched itself into my mind. I knew I was lingering too long, but resisting felt impossible. I told myself it was harmless. Just a young man noticing a woman who had long since grown used to being admired quietly. But somewhere deep inside, I already knew the truth. There was something about her that drew me in, something I couldn't simply walk away from. And maybe, just maybe, she had already noticed. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind you never expect to remember. The sun was low, painting the neighborhood in soft gold, and I was helping my friend, her son, carry groceries in from the car. The trunk was open, bags lined up, heavier than they looked. I remember pulling one out when I heard her voice, warm and lilting, behind me. "You boys always underestimate how heavy these are," she said with a smile, stepping closer. She wore a simple blouse, sleeves rolled up just past her elbows, and there was something effortless about the way she carried herself. She didn't rush, didn't seem hurried like most people. Her presence filled the space with a kind of calm that made me hyper-aware of myself, my movements, my posture, even the sound of my own breathing. I mumbled something about it being no problem, but my voice felt smaller than I wanted it to be. She noticed. She always seemed to notice. "You're quieter than the others," she teased, glancing at me while reaching for one of the bags. And then it happened. Our hands brushed. Not a long contact, just the edge of her fingers against my wrist as she lifted the bag from my grip. But it was enough. A spark, subtle but undeniable, raced through me. She didn't pull away quickly. If anything, her touch lingered just a moment longer than it had to, before she shifted the bag easily onto her hip. I caught the faintest trace of her perfume again, something floral, something warm, and it stayed with me even as she turned toward the house. Her son didn't notice, of course. He was busy stacking soda bottles into his arms, laughing about how he'd forgotten half the list. But I noticed. Every second. Every detail. When we carried the last bag inside, she was already unpacking, moving with the ease of someone who knew exactly where everything belonged. I stood awkwardly for a second, not sure whether to offer more help or step out of the way. "Thank you," she said suddenly, looking at me, not past me, not through me, but directly at me. And for a heartbeat too long, I forgot how to breathe. I nodded, probably too quickly, and muttered something clumsy like, "anytime." But the truth was, I didn't want the moment to end. Her presence had a pull, something unspoken that made the room feel different just because she was in it. Later, when I walked back across the yard, my friend joking about video games or plans for the evening, I wasn't listening. All I could think about was the way her fingers had grazed my skin. It shouldn't have meant anything. Just an accidental brush of hands. But to me, it felt like the smallest door had opened, and I wasn't sure I wanted it to close again. It was one of those evenings when the world feels softer than usual. The sun had already slipped below the rooftops, leaving the sky tinted with lavender and fading gold. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine drifting from her garden, the kind of fragrance that lingers even after you've stepped away. I sat outside on the porch, nursing a glass of water, pretending to scroll through my phone but not really seeing the screen. My attention kept wandering to the house across the yard. Maybe I was hoping for a glimpse of her, maybe it was just habit now. The sound of a door creaking open pulled me from my thoughts. And there she was, stepping out onto her porch, barefoot, a light shawl draped loosely around her shoulders. She leaned on the railing, gazing into the dusky sky as if she, too, was caught in the quiet. I told myself not to stare. I'd been caught before, and the memory of her smile still unsettled me. But my eyes betrayed me, lingering too long, tracing the outline of her figure in the fading light, the gentle movement of her fingers brushing the edge of the shawl. Then her gaze shifted. She looked directly at me. I froze, caught in the act. For a second, I considered looking away, pretending I hadn't been watching her. But something in her expression held me there. Her lips curved into a faint smile. And in the calmest, most unhurried voice, she said across the space between us, "You always stare too long." The words weren't sharp. They weren't mocking. If anything, they carried a softness that unsettled me more than if she had laughed outright. My throat tightened. 1,000 excuses rushed through my mind, denials, half-truths, something to make light of the moment. But none of them reached my lips. Because the truth was simple, she was right. I swallowed hard, lowering my eyes for a moment, then raising them back to meet hers. She was still smiling, but there was something else in her expression now, something that made my chest ache. Not just amusement, but a quiet vulnerability, as if she wanted to know why. The silence between us stretched, filled with the hum of crickets and the faint rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure she could hear it from where she stood. Finally, I managed to find my voice, though it came out rougher than I intended. "I'm sorry. I don't mean to." Her smile softened further, almost tender. "I didn't say I minded," she whispered back, so gently I almost wondered if I'd imagined it. In that moment, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of us, her standing there with the shawl falling slightly from her shoulder, me gripping my glass too tightly, both of us caught in an unspoken current pulling us closer without a single step being taken. I knew then that everything had shifted. Whatever this was, it wasn't just me anymore. The evening after she told me I stared too long, I couldn't get her words out of my mind. They echoed softly, not in accusation, but in a way that left me restless. I wondered if I'd crossed some invisible line, or if she had quietly drawn me closer to hers. It was a Saturday when the chance finally came. I had dropped by to see her son, only to find he'd gone out with friends. She stood at the door instead, leaning against the frame with a calm smile. "He didn't tell you?" she asked. I shook my head. "Guess he forgot." Her eyes lingered on me, as though weighing a decision. Then she stepped back, opening the door wider. "Well, no sense in you walking back empty-handed. Come in for some tea." I hesitated. It should have been a simple choice, politeness, nothing more. But stepping inside felt like crossing into something I couldn't turn away from. Still, I nodded and followed. The house was warm, filled with soft light and the faint scent of vanilla from a candle burning on the counter. She moved gracefully through the kitchen, filling a kettle, her movements deliberate but unhurried. I sat at the small table, my palms resting against the cool wood, trying to appear relaxed though my pulse betrayed me. When she set the cups down, she sat across from me, not too close, not far either. The steam curled between us, carrying the subtle fragrance of jasmine tea. At first, the conversation was light. Books, music, small memories of the neighborhood. But slowly, almost without realizing, we drifted into deeper waters. "You know," she said after a pause, stirring her cup, "sometimes it feels like people stop really seeing you after a certain age. As if you blend into the background." Her tone was casual, but there was a fragility beneath it. For a moment, she didn't meet my eyes. I leaned forward slightly, my words slipping out before I could stop them. "I've never once overlooked you." She looked up then, startled, and I felt heat rise to my face. But I didn't look away. Something in her expression shifted, surprise first, then something softer. She tilted her head slightly, as if trying to read me. And then she smiled, not the polite kind, but one that seemed touched with gratitude. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was full. As if the air itself had thickened, holding more than just words between us. When she poured a little more tea, her fingers brushed against mine as she slid the cup closer. The contact was fleeting, yet deliberate enough that it left a warmth spreading up my arm. The candlelight flickered, catching the curve of her cheek, the faint shimmer in her eyes. Sitting there, so close, I realized that what drew me to her wasn't just beauty, it was the way she allowed herself to be real. Honest. Seen. And in that quiet, I felt something stir inside me that was more than fascination. It was connection. The storm arrived suddenly, the way summer storms often do, without warning, without patience. One moment the evening was calm, the next the sky split open with a roll of thunder that rattled the windows. We were still at the kitchen table, our teacups half full, when the first flash of lightning lit up the room. She glanced toward the window, her shoulders tensing almost imperceptibly. I noticed it instantly, the way her fingers curled slightly against the porcelain cup, the faint quickening of her breath. "You don't like storms?" I asked gently. She gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. "They've always unsettled me." "Silly, I know." "It's not silly," I said quietly. "It makes sense, storms remind us we're not in control." Another thunderclap shook the air, and this time she flinched more noticeably. Without thinking, I reached across the table and laid my hand over hers. My palm covered the back of her hand, warm against her cooler skin. For a second, I expected her to pull away. But she didn't. Her fingers remained beneath mine, still, then slowly relaxing, as though she was letting herself trust the contact. The silence between us changed. It wasn't filled with small talk anymore, it was alive, humming with something unspoken. My heartbeat pounded against my chest, and I wondered if she could feel it through the faint tremor in my hand. Her eyes lifted to mine, and for a long moment neither of us moved. The storm outside roared, but here, at this small table, it felt like the world had grown impossibly quiet. "You have a steady way about you," she murmured finally, her voice low. "Like you don't scare easily." I almost laughed at that, because inside, I was anything but steady. Yet hearing her say it, I wanted to live up to the image she saw. I tightened my hand just slightly around hers, a silent promise that she wasn't alone in the noise of the storm. The rain battered harder against the windows, filling the house with a steady rhythm. She shifted in her chair, leaning just a little closer, enough that I could catch the faint warmth of her perfume, mingling now with the scent of rain through the open window. We sat like that for what felt like forever, her hand beneath mine, the flicker of candlelight painting her face in soft shadows, the air thick with the closeness neither of us dared put into words. And when the thunder finally rolled away, fading into the distance, neither of us seemed in a hurry to move. Our hands remained joined, quietly, as though letting go would undo something fragile we had just begun to build. In that fragile stillness, I realized, this wasn't just comfort. It wasn't just kindness. It was the beginning of something neither of us had dared name, but both of us felt. The storm passed as quickly as it had come, leaving the night quiet, washed clean. The rain still whispered against the gutters, but the thunder had faded into nothing more than a distant hum. Inside, the candlelight flickered softly, casting long shadows across the kitchen walls. We hadn't moved much since it began. Our hands had remained together longer than I ever thought possible, long enough that I could feel the steady warmth of her skin, the gentle way her fingers shifted as if adjusting to my touch. It wasn't dramatic, nothing the world outside would ever notice, but to me it felt monumental. Eventually, I glanced at the clock and knew I should leave. My friend would return soon, and the fragile stillness we'd built wasn't meant to be interrupted. With reluctance, I withdrew my hand and pushed back my chair. I should get going, I said softly, almost apologetically. She didn't answer right away. She just nodded, standing as well, her shawl slipping slightly from one shoulder. For a moment, she looked younger, almost uncertain, as if deciding whether to let the moment end. I made my way toward the door, each step heavier than the last. Part of me wanted to stay, to hold on to the closeness we'd shared during the storm. But another part knew how dangerous it felt to linger too long in something unnamed. As I reached for the handle, she moved. Quietly, gracefully, she crossed the small space between us. Before I could turn, her hand was against my chest, light but steady, stopping me where I stood. My breath caught. Her palm rested over my heart, and I swear she could feel it racing beneath her touch. The warmth of her skin seeped through the thin fabric of my shirt, grounding me and unmooring me all at once. I turned slowly, my eyes meeting hers. She wasn't smiling now, not the playful smile she'd given me in the garden, not the teasing one when she caught me staring. This expression was different. Searching. Vulnerable. Her voice was almost a whisper. You make me feel seen. The words sank into me, heavy and delicate at the same time. I didn't know what to say, but the truth rose before I could stop it. I can't help how I feel when I'm around you. Her eyes softened, and for a moment, we just stood there, the space between us charged with everything we couldn't name. I could hear the faint drip of water outside, the hum of the refrigerator, even the sound of my own heartbeat against her hand. She didn't move closer. Neither did I. Yet it felt as though something invisible had already crossed the line between us. And when she finally drew her hand back, slowly, almost reluctantly, it wasn't to push me away. It was to let the moment end on her terms. Good night, she murmured, her voice gentle but threaded with something unspoken. I stepped out into the damp night air, my chest still warm where her hand had rested, knowing I would never forget the feel of it. The air outside was cool, damp with the remnants of rain, yet I lingered on her porch for a long moment before stepping away. My chest still carried the warmth of her touch, the imprint of her hand against my heart. I thought leaving would ease the tension, but every step away from her door felt heavier than the last. I was halfway down the walkway when I heard it, her voice, soft but clear through the quiet night. Wait. I turned, and there she was again, framed by the warm glow of the doorway. She had pulled the shawl tighter around her shoulders, her hair loose now, slightly tousled from the storm's breeze. There was something in her eyes, hesitation, yes, but also a courage that hadn't been there before. I stepped back toward her, unsure of what to say, unsure if I should say anything at all. She didn't give me the chance. Instead, she crossed the space between us, her movements slow, deliberate, as though each step carried a decision she had already made. When she reached me, she didn't speak. She simply lifted her arms and slipped them around my shoulders, drawing me gently against her. For a heartbeat, I froze, not out of resistance, but out of disbelief. And then I let go of the hesitation I'd been carrying and wrapped my arms around her waist, holding her carefully, as if the moment itself was fragile glass. Her cheek came to rest lightly against my shoulder, and I felt the steadiness of her breath. The storm outside had passed, but in her arms, I realized, a different kind of calm had taken its place. "You're kind," she whispered, so quietly it was almost lost to the night. "That's what I see most." Her words settled in me deeper than I expected. Not because they flattered me, but because they were true. She wasn't holding me because I stared too long, or because of something fleeting. She was holding me because, in some small way, I had made her feel valued, seen, in a world that often looked past her. I tightened my embrace just slightly, my hand resting at the small of her back, feeling the warmth through the thin fabric of her dress. The faint trace of her perfume mingled with the clean scent of rain, and for a long, unbroken stretch of time, neither of us needed to say anything. When she finally pulled back, her hands lingered on my shoulders. Her eyes searched mine, not with uncertainty, but with a quiet acceptance. "Good night," she said softly, her smile touched with warmth. I nodded, my voice catching in my throat. "Good night." As I walked back across the yard, the night air cool against my skin, I knew something had changed between us. It wasn't a grand declaration, it wasn't anything the world would see. But in that quiet embrace, we had both found something we didn't know we needed. And sometimes, I realized, that's how love begins, not with fireworks, but with a smile, a touch, and the unshakable feeling that you've been seen. If this story touched you, don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who believes in slow burn love, and subscribe for more heartfelt age gap romance stories. Your support helps these quiet, tender moments come alive.